Hello, I'm Simon Whistler, you're watching TopTenzNet, and in the video today we're looking at the top 10 common misconceptions about the ancient world.
Number 10. The Library of Alexandria was quickly destroyed in a giant fire. The stories you've heard are that the destruction of the Library of Alexandria was one of the greatest tragedies of the ancient world. The library had stood for centuries, a bastion of learning where we stored knowledge for the future, and then one day the city was overrun and the unthinkable happened. The invaders ordered the library destroyed and it was burned to the ground. However, the truth of the matter is that the popular story about the Library of Alexandria is totally false. While the library was eventually ordered destroyed by invaders, this was hardly the library's first brush with danger. For the long years it stood, the library was subjected to multiple fires, due in part to the volatile nature of the world's borders at the time and how often people were at war. However, historians believe that even more than war, it was actually budget cutbacks that slowly destroyed the library over time. By the time the library was finally destroyed, most of what was kept in the library were spiritual texts and little else. The rest had long ago been sent to other libraries in the ancient world where it would be cared for better. Number 9. We have fully discovered the pyramids at Giza. The pyramids at Giza are one of the most well-known monuments in the world and are still considered a wonder of the ancient world. There have been countless documentaries and other specials focused on the pyramids, the meaning they had for the Egyptians, and most importantly, how they were built. The truth is that to this day there is still no one consensus agreed upon by archaeologists or historians of any kind as to how exactly they were constructed. However, despite the fact that we are no closer to being sure how they did it, most people assume that we have fully explored the pyramids at Giza and are now making our theories based on that evidence. Unfortunately, while modern archaeology continues to provide us with new insights, there is actually much to discover still. The pyramids at Giza have many secret passageways and rooms, some of which we only recently discovered exist for sure, and others that we could only guess at the existence of in the past. Number 8. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon were built by King Nebuchadnezzar. Most people have heard of the fabled Hanging Gardens of Babylon, an amazing city in a desert area with beautiful gardens all over the city and walls. Somehow this wondrous paradise was kept alive with an advanced irrigation system that would have perhaps even rivaled the best that anyone has used today. However, some people in recent years started putting a damper on the beauty of the gardens, claiming that there is a strong possibility that the whole thing never existed and was just made up as a fanciful story by writers at the time. The reason is that while Babylon was one of the first civilizations to record things, they never recorded anything about having a city full of hanging gardens, nor is there any evidence in historical records at the time that Babylon had any such thing. People have started to believe that there were never any hanging gardens, but it turns out they may have just been looking in the wrong place. After many years of research, Dr. Daly from the University of Oxford discovered that the fabled hanging gardens were actually built by the Assyrians in the nearby city of Nineveh. Number 7. Napoleon and his men shot off the Sphinx's nose. The Sphinx has not had its nose for a very long time, and while it is definitely a great historical loss, the reason is different depending on who you ask. The popular story goes that Napoleon and his men were on a sort of tour of conquest heading through Egypt when they decided to camp by the Great Pyramids for a while. While they were there, they decided that they should practice their soldiering skills, and someone got it into their head that they should do some cannon fire aiming practice. Of course, considering there weren't a lot of other good targets around, they decided that the Sphinx's face would be perfect for the job. The resulting target practice destroyed the Sphinx's nose. However, we know this story is not true because artistic drawings dated well before the time of Napoleon already showed the Sphinx clearly missing his nose. Number 6. Da Vinci dropped iron balls from the Tower of Pisa. Back in the ancient days, a widely believed theory proposed by Aristotle was that objects with different weights would fall at very different speeds. The stories go that Da Vinci went to the top of the Leaning Tower of Pisa and dropped 2 objects of much different weight, as a demonstration of his opposing theory to his students and surrounding crowds. When both objects landed at the same time, it proved Aristotle wrong in one of the most dramatic scientific demonstrations of all time. Unfortunately, while the story certainly is fanciful and interesting, there is no reason to believe that it is true. Da Vinci did propose something similar as a thought experiment to his students when arguing his point, but apart from the exaggerated claims of one student, there is no evidence he actually went to the effort to do any such thing. Number 5. The ancient Amazons were man-haters. Most people think of the Amazon warriors of legend as a secret, fierce, women-only group of nomads that used their great skill with the bow to take down their enemies. They were known to be extremely brave and capable fighters, and their beauty entranced the men of Greece. For the longest time, historians were not sure if they existed because the stories about them were so fanciful. The tales claim that the Amazons were a truly women-only society, and that they would occasionally have sex with men from a nearby village that they made a deal with, and they would send back any male children that they birthed, or just castrate them or leave them to die. Despite some people being unsure if they existed, historians have recently discovered evidence that there were a real people that the Greeks came to call Amazons. It's just that many of the tales about them are either exaggerated or just wildly inaccurate. The people they discovered archaeological evidence of were called Scythians, and many of the men and women were buried with war gear, meaning that it wasn't just a female society, and it wasn't just women who fought in battle either. In fact, it's likely the wild stories started among ancient Greek writers due to how strange the idea of women fighting with bows on horseback was to their societal views. While these women were certainly capable killers of men, there is also plenty of reason to believe they loved and fought beside men, and did not do anything untoward to their male children. Number 4. The ancient Egyptians visited the Grand Canyon. In the early 1900s, a story was published in a newspaper claiming that a team of archaeologists funded by the Smithsonian had been checking out caves in the Grand Canyon, places almost no one ever looks at, and they discovered something incredible. They found ancient Egyptian ruins in the cave, suggesting that the Egyptians had managed some form of sea travel advanced enough to make it all the way across to such a far continent. More recently, these claims have resurfaced in the media and popular mindset, likely due to the recent popularity of the ancient aliens theories. However, while it would be really cool to think that Egyptians actually managed such a feat, there is actually no evidence that there was any such expedition. The Smithsonian has always denied that the two archaeologists in the news story ever worked for them or went on such a trip, and have stated flat out that they do not believe there were ever any ancient Egyptians in the Americas. Number 3. The placement of the Easter Island heads is an impossible mystery. You have probably heard before of the famous heads, also known as moi, that show up all over Easter Island. The statues are enormous constructions of extremely heavy rock that weigh tons, and yet the ancient people managed to move them incredibly long distances to place them on the shore and all over the islands without any advanced technology at all. For the longest time, the prevailing wisdom was that we simply had no idea how they managed to do it. Some people took this as proof that there must have been some advanced technology of some sort instead of primitive tools. However, a recent study by interested archaeologists has yielded strong evidence as to how they actually did it, and it didn't require any advanced technology at all. The experts who have been studying the statues believe that they were designed on purpose so that they could be moved long distances. They theorized that the large bellies and the oddly proportioned bases allowed people to easily push the statue into a state of imbalance, and then rock it back and forth, almost walking it across the ground to where it wanted to go. Number 2. The Romans salted Carthage so nothing would grow there again. The tale goes that near the end of the Third Punic War, the Roman general Scipio finally defeated Carthage and decided to make sure that they were well and truly punished for their defiance. He had their fields all plowed under and then sowed them with salt so that nothing would grow there again. He then took all of the remaining people and made them slaves, destroying their civilization forever. This tale is fairly easy to believe because the Roman Empire of the time is still looked back on by many as a vast and unfeeling machine. However, the claim that the city of Carthage was plowed under and salted after its defeat bears no real historical evidence. The claims that the city was thus ruined were not even written until the 19th century, and no one but the historian who made the claim has ever suggested that such an action actually occurred. The more important truth here, though, is that it would not perhaps be the most effective and permanent means of messing with your foes anyway. Given the right conditions, soil that was salted could meet the proper conditions for growing plants again before long, so it would hardly be a permanent ruination of the land to begin with. Number 1. The Vikings used human skulls as mugs. The Vikings were known for performing daring raids across the European coastline, terrorizing villagers and scaring Europeans into giving them money in order to avoid being raided further. They went on countless raiding expeditions, securing slaves and resources, and then heading back to their homeland with their hard-won loot. They were known for being brutal and skilled warriors in combat, but perhaps the most fearsome claim about them was how they allegedly drank their booze. The legend says that Viking warriors were so metal that they would drink their alcohol from the skulls of their defeated enemies. However, it turns out that the whole drinking from skulls thing was likely nothing more than a mistranslation. What the Vikings actually used were drinking vessels made from the horns of animals. When a scholar was trying to translate an old Viking death song, he misunderstood a line that included the phrase, "the curved tree of skulls," to mean actual human skulls instead of animal horns. Due to how few people could read the original text that was being translated, the error was not caught for a very long time and made its way into the popular mindset.
So I really hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please do hit that like button below me now, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Button on the screen as well as below this video. And if you did enjoy this one by us, why not check out some of our other videos, which are over there on the right. One is the top 10 huge historical myths, some of those you wouldn't believe, and below that we've got another similar one, which is the top 10 historical facts that aren't true. So be sure to check both of those out, be sure to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.